Fluency is the ability to read accurately with expression, and this is something that we will be really working on this year in first grade. In the past, we have focused more on decoding and just the ability to read and break down a word in the fall, and we've spent the spring working on fluency. This year, I hope to, with the naming letters and the words and the sentences, build us up in the fall to be able to handle the passages that we get in the spring. So I'm excited to see how this works out, and I welcome your feedback for how it's going at home. As you can see here on the screen, it says research shows that fluency progresses best when it is practiced 3 times a week. And since you're at home 3 times a week and fluency is a more individual skill, it will be something that is only done at home. Now each time before you practice fluency, you will first warm up. Now a warm-up looks a little bit different with each chart, and so here on the screen you'll see the letter recognition chart that you have. Now by warm-up, what I'm referring to is this first row of letters. So before you begin, you'll just ask your child, I would like for you to touch and name the first row of letters. So they'll go M, N, O, P, Q, R. Once they have read the first row of letters, and you've corrected any possible mistakes, then they will start step 1, and they will only repeat these last 4 lines. So the first row is only the warm-up row and will never be repeated again. Now you will do the same thing when you're practicing reading words with those charts. However, since I made those myself on the computer, I went ahead and shaded that first row for you to give you a visual representation that that is the warm-up row and you don't have to go back up to that row. But maybe for your child, when you're working on the letters, you might need to cover up with a sheet of paper that first row so they don't go back to it. It just depends on what works better for your child. Now the warm-up for sentences and passages is simply a pre-read. So the child will read the sentence or the passage in its entirety before you start the timer. Now that you have warmed up, you begin step 1, which is the cold read. And you will set a timer for 1 minute, and this is the child will just name the letters or read the sentence until the timer is up. Now what I would encourage you to do is, and like I mentioned earlier, you might need to put a sheet of paper, scratch out that first row. You'll notice that there are 6 letters for each row, and there are 4 rows. So as mom and you're watching them read, keep an eye on where they are, and every time they hit this first R, or the first letter up on that first row, I would just make a tally mark to the side, and depending on however many tally marks you have at the end, you can just multiply that by 24 and get the total number of letters. But that is what you'll be doing, is the child will name and read. I encourage them to tap with their finger on each letter just to help with their tracking and their focus, and then you will count their letters that they have read after a minute. Now you'll notice that under the instructions it says after the timer is off, you'll put the total number of letters or words in the blank under C at the bottom of the appropriate graph. So here's your graph, and let's say that your child read 64 words or 64 letters in that 1 minute. So you just did your first cold read, so under the C you wrote 64, and then I would encourage you to let your child color in up to 64. This gives them some ownership into it, and also kind of just gets them involved in the process. It doesn't feel like they're kind of necessarily being graded. Now step 2 and step 3 are basically the same thing as step 1, except that you are not recording. So they would be considered a practice read. So you'll do a practice read for a minute, have the child repeat the readings. You don't have to tally up the total number of letters and words. This is just allowing them that extra practice. Then you give them another minute of practice. And for some of your kids, this is going to seem like a lot of practice and kind of redundant. But what it does is it really just solidifies those letters, those words, the sentences that they're reading, so that when they come to step 4, they can really see some progress. So step 4 we call the repeated read, and this is the final timed reading. So you're repeating step 1 and step 2 and step 3. Now this time you're going to record the total words or the letters under R at the bottom of the graph where it says next to the C that you just colored in previously. To help with the clarity of reading this graph, I would encourage you to use the same color per day. So for day 1, you color the C and the R both yellow. And then on day 2, you would change your color for the next one, and then so on. This chart is not necessarily like a typical bar graph in that you're trying to, track a progress upward. You're really just wanting to look within the bracket of that C and that R because you're wanting to see the improvement from the cold read to the repeated read. So that is what your daily fluency practice will look like. Now I want to quickly go over how you know when to move on to the next chart. For the instant letter or the word recognition, a child's ready to move on to the next graph when he or she can read 60 letters or words per minute. Like it says, if this happens on the first try, then you're just moving on to the next graph. But let's say that your child struggled on the instant letter recognition chart 3, so the one with the M, N, O, P, Q, R. If they did not hit 60 letters in that 1 minute, then you just repeat that chart the next day. And that's okay, and you don't need to make a big deal about it. You just need to say, hey, we're going to read this again today. Now, unlike instant letter recognition or word recognition, you will never repeat a sentence or a passage. You will have several sentences provided. I think I just provided you with 10 or 12 initially, but as we need more of them and as you let me know what you need, I can definitely add more into your binder. As you should know, our end goal for first grade is 65 words per minute, so that is what we're working up to. And these sentences and passages will just be extra practice for them to get comfortable with reading while being timed for rapid naming of especially high frequency words that appear in the sentences and the passages. So when you're recording them on your graph, it's mainly just feedback for how well they're doing, how fast they're reading, kind of their expression, and just kind of gives you, as a parent, some feedback, weekly, 3 times a week, and the student gets lots of practice. Throughout the year, I will be checking the binder to see the progress of the child with their words per minute, especially with the sentences and passages, for it will help me with determining what we need to practice in class and how to set the lesson plan. But if you have any questions about fluency, if you're doing it right at home or you don't really know where to move on to, or any concerns, or this is taking us a while, my child hates it, please let me know and we can talk about how we can tweak things or change things to make it better.